Tubbs finds himself caught in the middle of a war between televangelists on today's Miami Vice. Amen, Send Money was directed by James Quinn and was written by John Schulian, whose name we've heard an awful lot around these parts, but who is mostly famous for creating the character of Xena Warrior Princess, which is not at all a bad claim to fame. A televangelist named Reverend Bill Bob Proverb takes to the airwaves for his satellite television show. Bill Bob is played by the great Brian Dennehy. If you're one type of filmgoer, you know Dennehy best for his role as Chris Farley's dad in Tommy Boy. And if you're the diametric opposite kind of filmgoer, you know him for his acclaimed tour de force performance in experimental filmmaker Peter Greenaway's The Belly of an Architect. I have seen both Tommy Boy and The Belly of the Architect, and I refuse to tell you which I prefer. Bill Bob preaches about his love of materialism and silk suits and manicures, and somehow manages to tie it into both God and physics. It's a blatant appeal to good old-fashioned vintage 1980s greed, and while there's not much nuance to it, it's kind of breathtaking in its in-your-face directness. An undercover Tubbs busts a woman who is looking to buy a large amount of drugs. She makes a break for it, but crashes her car through a storefront window, and Crockett and Tubbs arrest her. They identify her as Leona Proverb, wife of the good Reverend Bill Bob, and she's played by Broadway star Anita Morris. Leona has multiple drug busts on her record, so the DA is ready to charge her with a felony. The Reverend rails against Vice and makes a televised appeal for his viewers to send him money for a good lawyer for Leona. Tubbs receives an anonymous call from a young woman who claims to have incriminating information about the Reverend. Tubbs meets with a young woman, Faye Nell, who is played by Joe Anderson. She attacks Tubbs and yells for help. When the night watchman arrives, Faye Nell claims Tubbs tried to rape her. Crockett visits the Reverend's former business partner and rival, Mason Mather, played by James Tolkan, probably best known as the assistant principal who hassles Marty McFly in Back to the Future. Mather, who has his own TV show, is disgusted by Bill Bob's love of materialism. He tells Crockett that Bill Bob keeps a harem of wayward women. Meanwhile, Bill Bob and Leona hold a press conference where Leona claims Tubbs tried to rape her while arresting her. While Satellite by the Hooters plays, Switek, Gina, and Trudy trail Bill Bob, hoping to catch him doing something illicit. Instead, it turns out he leads an impeccable private life, donning jeans and a baseball cap to volunteer anonymously at a homeless shelter and donating a big chunk of his income to worthy causes. So Vice entertains the possibility that someone may be going after Tubbs to ruin Bill Bob. Their search for Bill Bob's enemies leads Crockett and Tubbs to a seller of kitschy religious knickknacks named Fast Eddie, who is played by Ben Stiller. Stiller would rise to fame in the early 90s as the creator and star of The Ben Stiller Show before going on to direct and star in a bunch of films, including Reality Bites and Zoolander. Fast Eddie tips them off that Mason Mather is looking to get rid of Bill Bob as a competitor because Bill Bob has a satellite television show, whereas Mather is just stuck spinning his wheels in local television. Crockett and Tubbs hang out at a local bar where Crockett infuriates the regulars by asking the bartender to change the channel from a video show, on which the video for Black Book by alternative country cowpunk band Rank and File is playing, to Mason Mather's televangelist show. On his show, Mather prophesies that the Lord will rain fire and lightning down on Bill Bob Proverb in exactly 2 hours and 10 minutes. And sure enough, Bill Bob's studio is destroyed by a dramatic electrical fire during his nightly broadcast. Crockett and Tubbs go to talk to Mather and find he's been in a coma in the hospital ever since his own broadcast. Tubbs and Crockett confront Bill Bob, who is miserable about the destruction of his studio. The electrical system at the studio had been tampered with, which is what caused the fire, so Crockett and Tubbs track down Bill Bob's electrician, Becker. Becker admits Mather paid him to start the fire. Mather, meanwhile, wakes up from his coma and flees the hospital. Still in his hospital gown, he climbs up a transmission tower, and while Crockett and Tubbs try to talk him down, he is electrocuted by the tower. The episode ends with Bill Bob standing with Leona in his ruined studio, making a successful plea to his viewers to send him money to get his life back on track. Considering that this is an episode where Tubbs is falsely accused of rape by 2 women, this is a surprisingly loose, funny episode. This is about as goofy as Miami Vice ever gets, and for the most part, it handles the goofiness pretty well. It's sloppy in places. There's a couple of spots where dialogue was clearly added in post-production to smooth over parts that the producers presumably thought were unclear. But overall, it works just because the tone is so loose and irreverent throughout. Brian Dennehy, who's one of those actors who's equally adept at comedy and drama, gives a terrific performance. Bill Bob Proverb is a big, broad character set in a very stylized and larger-than-life environment, And yet, Dennehy somehow manages to make him seem both very real and very funny. This episode, and many of the episodes that will come after it this season, bring an entirely different look and feel to the show than what we saw last season. This episode is streamlined in both plot and appearance, with a bright neon look and a story that's drawn in just a few bold lines. I think it's the right approach. My overriding complaint about season 3 was that it threatened to turn Miami Vice into just another cop show. And whatever your feelings about this polarizing episode, it sure doesn't seem like just another cop show. Because I always like it when Miami Vice goes big and weird, this one gets 4 flamingos from me. Next time, Crockett and Tubbs try to figure out whether a porn film is actually a snuff film, which turns out to be much more complicated than you'd think. Please join me then, and in the meantime, hit subscribe or find me on Twitter to talk about this episode, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.